I am fit for nothing now but the pit of corruption, wrote young Robert Murray McCheyne as his failing right lung threatened to end his pastoral ministry early. In an era that measured a preacher's true power by thunderous lungs and decades of tireless physical labor, the young Scottish minister was handed a death sentence. Yet, over the next 8 short years, this frail, coughing, broken young man would set Scotland ablaze with an unforgettable and deeply transformative spiritual revival across parishes. Throughout the history of preaching, the lasting strength of a minister's spiritual impact has rarely been proportional to the sheer vitality of their physical frame and stamina. The life of Robert Murray McCheyne from 1813 to 1843 offers a striking case study in this historic paradox of human weakness, yielding profound and lasting spiritual fruit. Operating within the 19th century Church of Scotland, his public ministry lasted less than a decade before his tragic death at 29, yet left an indelible mark. Modern perspectives on leadership often prioritize physical stamina, charismatic presence, and organizational efficiency above all else when evaluating a leader's overall potential for long-term influence. However, the life of Robert Murray McCheyne demonstrates that deep, enduring spiritual resonance frequently emerges directly from human vulnerability rather than natural strength or physical power. Rather than serving as a hindrance to his work, his chronic health conditions functioned as the foundational terrain upon which his theology and pastoral posture were built. Examining his life through the lens of physical impairment reveals how severe human limitation can sharpen rather than dilute a minister's ultimate effectiveness in historical context. In December 1835, almost immediately upon beginning his parish labors as an assistant at Larbert, Robert Murray McCheyne's fragile physical constitution suffered a profound collapse. A medical diagnosis revealed advanced tubercular damage, determining that his right lung was virtually non-functional, presenting the ambitious young Scottish minister with an existential crisis. The intellectual mechanism behind his reaction lay in his theological framework, refusing to view his bodily failure as an arbitrary biological accident or an unmitigated tragedy. Instead, he processed the affliction through a strictly providential lens, concluding this forced physical cessation was a direct divine chastisement targeting his subtle internal ambition. The physical incapacity of his lungs forced a severe recalibration of his operational priorities when active preaching and public activity became physically impossible for him. With public ministry paused, he reallocated his limited physical energy toward intense intercessory prayer, discovering a deeper spiritual foundation beneath his visible work for the church. Ministry ceased to be defined by visible action and human effort, becoming instead dependent on covert intercession as physical pain emptied his work of self-seeking ambition. His ongoing struggle with illness established a recurring pattern throughout his remaining years, periods of intense activity followed by sudden physical collapse and renewed theological reflection. Each period of forced silence operated as a corrective crucible for his interior life, stripping away reliance on personal charisma and natural human talents during ministry. During these recurrent periods of forced isolation, he argued that bodily weakness served to dismantle ministerial pride, recognizing that God had intentionally silenced his public preaching. He reflected that God closed his mouth because he remained at risk of speaking as much for his own recognition as for the ultimate divine glory. Out of these repeated breakdowns emerged his foundational conviction: a man cannot be a faithful minister until he preaches Christ for Christ's sake, until he gives up. Continuing his profound thought, he wrote that a true preacher must cease striving to attract people to himself, focusing entirely on serving the divine mission instead. The root reason for this progressive deepening was his deliberate refusal to separate his physical suffering from his ongoing spiritual formation throughout his brief pastoral career. He treated every bodily setback as an intentional pedagogical tool designed to strip away reliance on natural talent, intellectual eloquence, and compelling personal charisma in speech. Consequently, his recurring physical crises did not yield a trajectory of diminishing returns, but rather deepened his internal maturity and overall commitment to his local congregation. Instead, each physical decline yielded a proportional maturation in his spiritual authority and homiletical depth, creating an undeniable impact on those who heard him preach. Moving past his initial physical setbacks, Robert Murray McCheyne transitioned into his formal pastoral apprenticeship within the United Scottish Charge of Larbert and Dunipace. This assignment presented a remarkable geographical paradox, encompassing 6,000 souls split between Larbert's industrial ironworkers and Dunipace's quiet rural shepherds 3 miles away. To manage this massive population, Robert Murray McCheyne shared responsibilities with John Bonar, alternating Sunday pulpits across the regional parish locations to preach. The structural mechanism that defined his daily routine was home visitation. Despite fragile health, he traversed the 3-mile gap, turning cottage thresholds into pulpits. Systematic home visitation rapidly evolved into his favorite element of pastoral duty, as he refused to let physical exhaustion curtail his personal care for souls. By entering both soot-stained cottages and isolated crofts, he mapped his preaching directly onto the concrete realities of his people's everyday labor and struggle. The operational weight of this endeavor was immense, continuously compounding his pulmonary vulnerability, yet becoming the exact medium through which his pastoral sympathy flowed. Alongside exhaustive outdoor visitation, Robert Murray McCheyne maintained a crushing pulpit schedule, regularly preaching 3 distinct times on any given Lord's Day to crowds. He supplemented this heavy preaching load with multiple weekday Bible classes and special devotional meetings, refusing to slow his pace despite persistent bodily weakness. Far from reducing his intellectual output to compensate for frailty, he doubled down on rigorous textual scholarship, treating scriptural exegesis as an unshakable, non-negotiable anchor. He approached the Hebrew Old Testament and Greek New Testament with academic precision, believing sacred proclamation demanded deep textual engagement from every faithful minister. The underlying cost of this routine was inevitable physical deterioration, extracting a heavy tax on an already severely compromised respiratory system throughout his brief lifespan. Yet, Robert Murray McCheyne perceived intellectual laziness as a far greater spiritual danger than bodily exhaustion when serving the high calling of the gospel. By refusing to lower his scholarly or preaching standards, he established a clear template for pastoral integrity that inspired believers throughout the National Church of Scotland. His life proved that sacred rhetoric must always be fueled by rigorous textual study, regardless of the heavy physical price extracted from the weakened messenger. In late 1836, Robert Murray McCheyne accepted a call to St. Peter's Church in Dundee, entering a field that would prove to be the ultimate crucible. Dundee was a rapidly expanding industrial center characterized by overcrowded tenements, severe urban poverty, and the relentless strain of exhausting daily factory labor across parishes. He delivered urgent, Christ-centered sermons tailored directly to a congregation struggling under the heavy burdens of industrial life, meeting the setting with intense pastoral care. He maintained rigorous door-to-door visitation throughout the impoverished parish, actively seeking out the sick, destitute, and spiritually neglected while integrating physical relief with spiritual counsel. The concentration of human need accelerated his physical decline, establishing a pattern where maximum ministerial impact was achieved precisely through his profound bodily weakness and suffering. By late 1838, the severe toll of his Dundee labors forced a total physical collapse, compelling Robert Murray McCheyne to take an extended necessary sabbatical. During this forced absence, he participated in a historic mission of inquiry to Palestine alongside Andrew Bonar and Alexander Keith to evaluate international outreach possibilities. While Robert Murray McCheyne was away seeking physical recovery, a remarkable spiritual awakening broke out among his congregation in Dundee under the interim preaching of William Chalmers Burns. Upon returning home, still recovering from illness, Robert Murray McCheyne rejoiced without reservation in God's work accomplished through another instrument, demonstrating deep personal humility and grace. This awakening reinforced that the spiritual vitality of a church rests not upon a single leader's presence, but upon the independent work of the divine Spirit. The sustained fruitfulness of his public ministry was sustained by a rigorous, disciplined interior life grounded in deep personal prayer, self-examination, and immersion in Holy Scripture. To ensure his congregation's growth was rooted in substance, Robert Murray McCheyne designed a systematic daily Bible reading plan for believers to read through the Scriptures yearly. The reading plan provided a durable framework that sustained the congregation's scriptural intake long after Robert Murray McCheyne's physical presence was ultimately removed from their midst. His personal devotion directly informed his pastoral strategy, proving that enduring ministerial fruit is always the outward expression of a deeply cultivated, disciplined, spiritual walking life. In February 1843, despite a physical constitution worn thin by years of relentless labor, Robert Murray McCheyne answered a call to undertake an arduous evangelistic tour. Over 3 weeks, he traveled continuously across the northern countryside, preaching 24 separate times in parish churches, barns, and open fields to eager listeners. Upon returning to Dundee in severe exhaustion, he was met not with rest, but with a virulent epidemic of typhus fever sweeping rapidly through his parish. Rather than retreating to protect his frail health, he immediately immersed himself in visiting infected homes, seeking to offer spiritual comfort directly to dying parishioners. His severely weakened immune system proved unable to resist the contagion. Within days, he contracted the fever himself, leading to his final painful physical decline. His choice to enter fever-ridden homes while depleted was the logical culmination of a life that viewed pastoral duty as a complete surrender to divine service. On March 25, 1843, at 29 years old, Robert Murray McCheyne died, bringing his brief, intense, and deeply impactful public ministry to a close. His death embodied the conviction expressed in his hymn, "A life devoted to Christ is measured not by duration, but by faithful expenditure in holy service." The long-term impact of his life was expanded through the publication of a best-selling memoir written by his close, loyal friend, Minister Andrew Bonar. This volume crystallized his life as a classical model of evangelical spirituality, ensuring that his influence extended far beyond his short, remarkable lifetime across generations. Robert Murray McCheyne exemplified the gospel minister whose impact flowed from both articulate public preaching and a deeply devoted personal walk with God. His legacy was defined by the spiritual zeal he infused into pastoral work, offering a model of ministry where internal holiness outshines physical strength and longevity. The ultimate significance of his life rests in a paradox. Physical limitation, when placed within total surrender, can become a primary instrument of spiritual authority. While standard leadership relies on physical stamina and strategic power, his countercultural model proved that true authority is forged through deep spiritual depth in weakness. This inversion of power demonstrated that ministerial effectiveness does not depend on physical vigor, as bodily frailty strips away superficial self-reliance during public service. At the center of his spirituality was an absorbing love for Christ, rooted in a sharp awareness of redemption and expressed through deep daily scripture engagement. His experience of continuous physical suffering directly mirrored the timeless theological pattern of strength made perfect in human weakness throughout his brief life and labor. His acute sense of bodily frailty sharpened his focus on eternity, causing his public preaching to carry an intense, unforgettable weight and directness for listeners. His life offers profound implications for contemporary practice. A minister's greatest usefulness flows from personal holiness rather than relying solely on natural talent or efficiency. Physical limitations cultivate an awareness of mortality, producing passionate preaching that continuously prioritizes eternal significance over immediate transient success or public praise. Spiritual fruitfulness is not dependent on unbroken human health. Lasting work can flourish even when the minister is physically weakened or temporarily removed from service. Ultimately, Robert Murray McCheyne's life demonstrates that physical impairment is no obstacle. When surrendered fully, weakness becomes the very vehicle through which divine power is revealed. Take a moment to consider how you view your own physical, emotional, or structural limitations in your everyday life, work, and personal journey. Are you currently treating your personal weaknesses as obstacles to be overcome, or could they actually be the exact terrain through which your deepest influence is forged? When we stop striving for self reliance and embrace our intrinsic fragility, we make space for a far more enduring spiritual depth in our daily life. How might your work and relationships transform if you surrendered the demand for personal performance and allowed your vulnerabilities to cultivate genuine, lasting humility? Join us next week as we continue our series by exploring the extraordinary life of Fanny Crosby, another historic leader whose story inspires believers worldwide. We will examine how a woman who lost her sight in early infancy went on to write over 8,000 hymns, turning a lifelong impairment into a visionary legacy. If this deep dive into church history and pastoral theology resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Theology Today right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode as we continue unpacking the rich, complex stories behind history's most impactful and enduring faith leaders.